Good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. It feels a little weird seeing office staff instead of a lot of officers that I don't know. So we are going to treat this presentation as if we are on the road with it, because this is what is going to be posted for all law enforcement. So you're going to hear a lot that you already know, basic stuff, basic fields, basic changes, but this isn't just specific to you. It is specific to all law enforcement who maybe couldn't make the training, but it's just going to be a refresher for the office staff. If you have a question, I know I sent an email out this morning that's already changed. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I am going to have to repeat the question if it is something that I think the recording needs for local law enforcement to hear. I'll repeat it so that it's going to go into the recording. Captain's going to be interjecting in anytime he sees fit. I'll try and either stand closer to him if it's something that we think the recording needs to have. If it's something just office specific, then we'll determine that later. All right. So one of the first things we start off with is this is not a database change. This is a title change. So we did have some law enforcement agencies that reached out to us that were a little bit nervous thinking we were changing the entire database and they would have to switch. Title. So STARS is going to Mocars. It's a national push. It's a state push to get that word accident out of the vocabulary of the highway safety world. So it's just a name change, but also with that is some of the new modifications. So January 1 is the goal. It will not be changing, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's, again, we're going to start with the very first piece, which is that non-motorist piece. This is the largest piece that in the crash report did get modified. So instead of just having the pedestrian piece, where we have a lot of crashes that just don't quite fit that pedestrian scenario. So because we are having such a drastic increase in pedestrian injuries and fatals, we wanted to take a step back and look and see how we can better capture that. So that is specifically what this new non-motorist section is. So we have the new non-motorist section, and you're going to hear us talk about the work zone section. Again, huge increase in the crashes that we're seeing in work zones. A lot of workers being struck and killed. A lot of distraction going on in those areas. So the way this presentation flows is we're going to go through definitions first. So we're going to kind of hop around. So the very first two definitions that we have are activity area and advanced warning area, and they are specific to that work zone. So if we look on page 10, I am going to read some of these definitions, and then we'll come back and I'll give you some real life examples. So that activity area is going to be located on page 10 adjacent to the actual work area, whether workers and equipment are present or not. And that advanced warning area is going to be located after that first warning sign, but before the first work area. We see a lot of our crashes in that advanced warning area. So you have traffic backed up. You're not in the actual work zone. You're not outside of the work zone. You're in that transition area. Okay? We see a lot of vehicles backing up. We see a lot of secondary crashes. We see a lot of fatals. So we did want to add these terms because we are going to be looking a little bit deeper in the statistics of those work zone crashes. Did the work zone cause the crash? And I say cause, was there slowed traffic in the work zone and then a secondary crash? Or on the flip side of that, are you in a work zone where you have no lane decrease, no speed decrease, and is there a crash? Did the work zone have anything to do with it? No. So we're going to be looking at both of those, both us and the MoDOT side. So another piece that we really expanded on because of the increase in injuries and fatalities are the bicycles. So these are going to kind of fall in that non-motorist, area. So I'm going to read the definition, then we'll give you a real-world example. So on page 10, that bicycle facility is any road or path or way which is specifically designated as being open to bicycle, pedicycle travel, regardless of whether such facilities are designated for the exclusive use. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when you're driving down a city street and you're driving over the painting of that bicycle, That is warning you, please be aware bicyclists are welcome on this street. It's also warning the bicyclists, you have free reign to ride here, but please be aware of the other motorists. So it's kind of like that shared lane. Okay, your bicycle lane is any area adjacent to travel lanes of a traffic way which has been designated for preferential or exclusive use by the pedicyclists through striping, signage, or painted pavement markings. It also includes a portion of the roadway that has been designated by striping, pavement markings, or signs for preferential or exclusive use. So I just talked about where the bicycle sign is painted in the middle of the lane. This scenario, your bicycle lanes, they're usually painted to the right side of that, okay? So you have specific white lines and you have a bicycle painted. Can the vehicle cross over that? Well, when that vehicle is going to make a right-hand turn, yes, it's going to cross over it, but it is preferential for bicyclists. So we did add that term also. So disabling damage, this request came from Motor Carrier. What they wanted to focus on is their businesses that report to them, they run on their safety rating. Okay, if you have a low safety rating, if you're a commercial motor vehicle business, you're probably not going to get that much revenue as to whether you have a higher safety rating. So we're having situations where an officer is marking disabling damage, which is docking the commercial motor vehicles company's safety rating when it really isn't disabling damage. So we did add this new term for disabling damage, which precludes departure of the motor vehicle from the scene of the crash in its usual daylight operating manner after simple repairs. So what does that include? Disabling damage is going to include vehicles that are damaged that could have been driven, but it would have caused more damage driving them down the road. Okay, so let's say we have a hole in the radiator. Pretty sure that's going to be disabling damage. If you drive that vehicle down the road any further, it's going to damage it further. It does not include damage which can be remedied temporarily at the scene without special tools or parts. It does not include tire disablement without other damage, even if no spare tire is available. Headlamp or taillight damage or damage to turn signals, horns, windshields, wipers. Okay? So driver. We had this definition, but we wanted to match muck. So anytime there was a question on what the definition should be, we always reverted back to muck, which is your model minimum. So your driver is an occupant who is in actual physical control of a vehicle, or for an out-of-control vehicle, an occupant who was in control until control was lost. Captain gave me this example early on in the trainings, and I repeated it at every single one of them. If you have someone who is maybe trying to elude police, and they decide to jump out of the vehicle and take off running, but the vehicle runs over them, that is still considered, that person is still considered the driver. Okay, even though they're out of the vehicle, they are in control when control is lost, and that's something that you need to remember when defining driver. Emergency reference markers. This is just a modification. We removed the wording, only ERMs located on interstates can be used. If a law enforcement agency has a state road that has an ERM, we do want them to go ahead and use it. It's a great reference marker. So this was just a clarification to the definition. Left the scene. We were seeing officers who would submit a report and the report would not be marked left the scene. Okay, so leaving the scene, no. But in the narrative, it would be a left the scene. Unfortunately, what they were doing is associating that arrest, leaving the scene, with the type of crash, leaving the scene. Those really have nothing to do with one another. The crash report does not care if that person was arrested. If it was a left the scene crash, we wanted officers to mark it as left the scene crash. So this was just a clarification. And you're going to see a lot of these really are just clarifications. We were seeing just some inconsistencies in some of the reports, so we just wanted to clarify. This one is a little bit bigger. So motor vehicle and transport. Today, 2023, a motor vehicle and transport is the state or condition of a motor vehicle when it is being used for moving persons or property, including the vehicle itself, from one place to another, and is, if you see on page 20, number 1, in motion. Number 2, on a roadway, but not parked in a designated area, and currently it is also in readiness for motion. That third piece is what is being taken out of motor vehicle and transport. We're going to talk about some examples a little bit later. I know we had quite a bit of discussion about this, but we will have examples later, I promise. Non-motorist. This is one of the first terms to that new section where we're going to be really breaking out those non-motorist, aka currently pedestrian crashes. So a non-motorist is a new term. It is a person who is not an occupant of a vehicle. So that opens up a lot of possibilities. This includes pedestrians, bicyclists, pedicyclists, and occupants of other transport devices. When we get to looking at the PDF of the form, of the crash report, we're going to see exactly how these fields play out. Number of vehicles involved in a crash. We just changed the definition to the number of motor vehicles and railway vehicles, okay, directly involved in the crash before the situation stabilizes. We also clarified that working motor vehicles are included when engaged in a harmful event with a separate motor vehicle in transport during the unstabilized event. I'll give you an example of that. Let's say we have a little bit of snow, we have a little bit of ice, and we have a county or city or a MoDOT vehicle plowing the road. If they are involved in a crash, that includes a separate motor vehicle and transport. So if they hit me or they hit you, they are counted as a number 1 vehicle, number 2 vehicle, number 3 vehicle, okay? Once you hit somebody or something else, kind of changes the situation on that. Other non-motorists, because these are alphabetical, remember I said we're going to be hopping around a little bit, so that other non-motorist. Page 21, that is a person who is an occupant of a mechanically or electrically powered device that is not a motor vehicle that's in transport or parked. It's not a working motor vehicle, a railway vehicle, personal conveyance, or pedicycle. These are also going to include occupants of other transport devices. And we go to other transport device. A device or object other than a motor vehicle, working motor vehicle, personal conveyance, pedicyclist, aircraft, watercraft, railway vehicle, or weapon. The device or object may or may not be mechanically or electronically powered. So what are these examples of these other transport devices? Your horse and rider. Okay, a lot of our smaller communities, our rural communities have trail riders. We have Amish Mennonite communities. Some areas will never fill out a crash report like this. We do have some where we're just not capturing that information correctly, and now we're going to be able to. So now we can document that other transport device as a horse and rider. Also, a team of horses harnessed to a conveyance traveling on or off a roadway. A road grader grading a surface off the traffic way, that is the key word there. A riding lawnmower engaged in mowing off the traffic way, so I'm mowing my own lawn on a city street. Okay. A farm tractor engaged in planting a field, and a bulldozer engaged in excavating a construction site off the highway. These are all other transport devices. It excludes devices which do not move from one place to another, such as pipelines, elevators, escalators, ski lifts, conveyor belts, etc. Weapons, such as guns or torpedoes. And human-powered non-motorized devices like skis, scooters, roller skates, and baby carriages. Yes, like I said, we're gonna go through examples. We're gonna apply these a little bit later. These are just the definitions. Okay, pedicycle on page 22 of the preparation manual. A device operated by pedals, such as bicycles, tricycles, unicycles, pedal cars, etc., which can be propelled by human power and or a motor. It excludes motorized bicycles, mopeds. Pedicyclist is the person who is an occupant of a pedicycle in transport. Okay, this does not include someone standing on their feet next to or pushing a pedicycle. So if they're walking beside it and they're just pushing it, they are not a pedicyclist, they are a pedestrian. They need to be straddling the stirrups and the seat to be the pedicyclist. They can be stopped, but they need to be physically on it. Property damage only is a new term, a crash that results in damage to the motor vehicle or other property, but without injury to any occupants or non-motorists. We've seen this definition before, so that one's pretty easy. Roadside is also a new term, and there is a picture on page 25, if anybody wants to reference it. The outermost part of the traffic way from the property line or other boundary into the edge of the first road. It does not include persons on a sidewalk. Safety device. Because we changed the definition of pedestrian to non-motorist, this also needed to change. So we just changed the reference in the definition. Definition did not change. Shared use path or trails. Now we're going to go back to the bicyclists a little bit. A bikeway physically separated from motor vehicle traffic by an open space or a barrier. They must also be used by pedestrians, skaters, wheelchair users, joggers, and other non-motorized users. Must have two-way travel. So some of the cities you're seeing, they're pushing the greenways really, really hard. So you have this separate sidewalks, not really a traditional sidewalk. It is specifically for bicyclists, your walkers, your parents that are, pushing the stroller down. It's completely off the roadway. So that is going to be that shared use path or trail. Okay. Vehicle. This was just changed to any motor vehicle or railway vehicle. Work zone related. This is kind of where we're going to hone in on those work zone crashes. A crash that occurs in or related to a construction, maintenance, or utility work zone, whether or not workers were actually present at the time of crash. Work zone related crashes may also include those involving motor vehicles slowed or stopped because of the work zone, even if the first harmful event occurred before the first warning sign. So remember, that's kind of like that double-edged definition. We want to be looking at those crashes that the work zone had absolutely nothing to do with. We also want to be looking for those work zone crashes where this person or this crash was completely out of the work zone, but because it was caused from backup from the work zone. So we're going to be looking at this two different ways. So we're out of the definitions. You are going to see some of these definitions kind of creep back up again when we go over where they are on the crash report. So let's look at page 27. Sorry, look at page 28. I apologize. So now we're going to kind of place on the crash report where these changes are. So the number of vehicles involved, we went over that definition, the number of motor vehicles as well as railway vehicles directly involved, working motor vehicles that are going to be included when they're engaged with a first harmful event with someone or something else. Okay, so that's just where it is at on the crash report. These are new fields. So we have date of roadway clear and time of roadway clear. One of the things in the highway safety world in general, which includes all first responders, your volunteer firefighters, your city county firefighters, is the goal is to extract the victim as safely as possible, but as quickly as possible. The longer that crash is on that roadway blocking any lanes, the percentage of a secondary crash is increased drastically. So one of the things that we really wanted to capture is the length of time that crash is closing that roadway. So we are going to be asking officers to document, if we look at the date of roadway clearance on page 28, enter the date that all roadway lanes are available for traffic flow after the crash. Time of roadway clearance, enter the time that all roadway lanes are available for traffic flow after the crash. Some of the questions that we've been getting on the road. What if the lanes were never interrupted and they moved their vehicles, but later the tow truck maybe had to close a lane in order to tow a vehicle? This does not apply. It's when the crash happens. If that tow truck cannot get to that scene for hours, but yet traffic is still flowing like normal, then we don't need this data at all. Okay? Jackknife, we did have a little bit of confusion with how jackknife was being captured. So this is an uncontrolled articulation between a motor vehicle and its trailing unit causing contact and damage to the vehicle and or its trailing units. It has to have both elements. There has to be damage and there has to be contact. If there's contact only, it's not a true jackknife. Okay, again, it kind of goes back to that safety rating with those businesses, commercial motor vehicle businesses. We modified the definition of fell, jumped from motor vehicle. The motor vehicle occupant either involuntarily fell or intentionally leapt, not with suicidal or self-harming intentions from the vehicle causing injury. Mark if the occupant falls or jumps from the vehicle and is struck by the vehicle. Okay, just a clarification with cargo, equipment loss, or shift. Passengers are not considered cargo. And that was an issue with some reports. So they are passengers, occupants are not cargo. So just a clarification in that one. Page 30, the motor vehicle for thrown or fallen object. The motor vehicle is struck by a thrown or falling object. This excludes contacts with loads or cargo or objects set in motion from or by another motor vehicle in transport. And we are going to talk about the struck or falling set in motion in just a little bit, so just keep that in your head. So what are some examples of thrown or fallen object? A tree limb falls from a tree on a motor vehicle transport that is not a direct result of a cataclysm. Cataclysm is 75 miles an hour, wind and above. So if you just have 30-mile-an-hour winds, let's say, not this summer, but let's say we've had a wet spring and you're seeing a little bit of wind and some trees that fall over. Under 75-mile-an-hour winds, if that tree falls on a vehicle, it is going to be a thrown or falling object. Okay? A person unintentionally throws a baseball into a windshield of a motor vehicle in transport. You've got, a parent and a child out in their front yard, and they're throwing the ball around, and one of them misses, and it hits a car. This is where this is going to fall. A riding mower engaged in a mowing, not a working motor vehicle. Okay, so this is not a MoDOT mowing operation. This is me mowing my own grass. I pick up a rock and I accidentally chuck it. Thrown or fallen object. Okay, so just a clarification on animal. This only includes live animals. Okay, if someone comes around the corner and they hit a dead animal, it's no longer classified as an animal, it's an other object. Okay, just a little clarification on some of these. Pedicycle, we modified this definition on page 30. A device operated by pedals which can be propelled by human power and or a motor. We talked about this a little earlier, bicycle, tricycle, unicycle, or pedicycle. Also includes a sidecar or trailer attached to any of these devices. Does not include motorized bicycles or mopeds. Okay, remember just briefly I said, remember that definition, we're going to come back to it. Let's talk about this new field, struck by falling, shifting cargo, or anything set in motion by a vehicle. We'll read it, we'll go through some real life experiences. A motor vehicle in transport on page 33 is struck by a load or cargo or anything that is set in motion by a separate motor vehicle resulting in a harmful event. A load or cargo that falls from a motor vehicle is considered part of the motor vehicle until the load or cargo comes to rest, at which point it becomes an other object. Okay, so give you an example. Let's say my husband and I buy a small freezer and he straps it to the back of the truck and the inevitable happens and it falls off. If that object is it still has momentum after it leaves our vehicle and it's going down the road and someone hits it, it's just imagine an imaginary string attached to our vehicle and that object while it's moving. Okay, so it is going to be classified as struck by falling, shifting cargo, or anything set in motion by a motor vehicle. If it stops, and we've informed law enforcement, you're going to get this information simply by talking to the person who hits the object. If it stops, then it's an other object. Some common sense scenarios may play, and some it might be they're going to have to decide whether that object was moving or whether it was already still. If there are no other cars around and you come around a corner and you hit something, I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be tied to another vehicle because there's no vehicle around. So Examples: a motor vehicle in transport is struck by cargo that falls from a pickup truck. It's the exact same example I just gave you. So the second one is a motor vehicle in transport struck by an object that is in motion after being struck by another motor vehicle in transport. The first initial impact between the object and motor vehicle did not result in a harmful event. So let's say I'm in my vehicle and I cannot avoid running over a 2x4. Well, sometimes those 2x4s just stay still on the road, and sometimes they get chucked in the air. If it gets chucked in the air and hits a vehicle behind me, it is struck by falling, shifting cargo, or anything set in motion. I set it in motion. I did not do it on purpose, but I set it in motion. Okay? Another piece of that is a motor vehicle in transport is struck by an animal that is in motion after being struck by another motor vehicle in transport. I'm sure many of you have come across crash reports on your desk where somebody hit a deer and then threw it into somebody else's vehicle. Okay, same scenario applies. Okay, parked motor vehicle. Remember when I talked about earlier what a motor vehicle in transport is? So on page 33 and 34, 33 has your definition. We've added an example of a parked motor vehicle to the definition. So if you look at Roman numeral 4, a truck stopped at a gas station pump or stopped at the exit from the gas station and is waiting to enter the roadway. Okay, so that is that parked motor vehicle. Now it's no longer going to be motor vehicle in transport. January 1. It's going to be a parked motor vehicle. Other non-motorist, briefly talked about this. Collision involving, we removed animal-drawn vehicle. When these are involved in a motor vehicle crash as the first harmful event, they will now be classified as other non-motorist. We talked about other non-motorist. New attribute, this is just where it's going to fall in collision involving. So you have a collision involving an other non-motorist. It's that person who is an occupant of a mechanically or electrically powered device that's not a motor vehicle in transport. So the directional analysis, we just removed falling, shifting cargo set in motion by motor vehicle because it has its own category now. So these impacts will be marked other. And we just also wanted to note on page 38 that angle does include a front to side impact. Okay, so we modified the definition and added a field on this next piece. Evidentiary photos taken, modified the definition. We added the term taken or obtained. Okay, we have a lot of the public that videos themselves a lot. They video themselves driving. So law enforcement can obtain that video for the crash report, for any reconstruction. So we just added that, but then we also added evidentiary video taken. So we wanted law enforcement to know this does not mean you have to physically take the video or take the photo. You can obtain it from somewhere else, document where you obtained it from. It has nothing to do with their business practice or how they file their crash reports. This is just an extra piece on the crash report to help them, reference back to something. We added multiple route designations. So we have new fields, Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, Corps of Engineers, National Forest Service, and Park Road. Some law enforcement agencies will never use these. Some will use them a lot. So they definitely needed to be added. Okay, one of the things I did notice when we were on the road, these next two slides, a lot of officers were like, oh, I get that. I see how that's important now. So again, we want to push that why. Why was this field changed? Why do we want to reiterate it? Why do we want to modify it? So we did add the sentence in the same county on page 44 under intersecting. Okay, let's say we have two counties that are sitting close together. We've got a crash pretty close to the county line. We want, crash was in County A. We want that officer in County A to reference only routes and intersections in their county. I don't care if that route or intersection is 2 miles away and they have one that's right there in County B. Because when we do trace reports, when we have the federal government, when we have the state government, when we have construction concerns, we need that location in that jurisdiction. If we get a request and they want to know how many crashes of this type are in this county, when that officer references the other county, we lose that data. So we always want them to reference intersections and streets in their county. The same applies for referencing unnamed roads, private roads. I live on a private drive, but it's named. There are some that are completely unnamed. We want them to go a little bit further away to reference that intersection or that road and pick a road that is named, because we cannot trace back to it for statistical purposes if it's an unnamed road. You may have a dangerous curve in a county close to an unnamed road, and the citizens are extremely upset that nothing's being done about it, but they're referencing an unnamed road. It's like they exist, but they don't know where they exist. So we really need law enforcement to kind of hone in on that and make sure they're using the correct names. So anytime in this revision, if you see the word road, it was changed to roadway. So it was just mainly a cosmetic, wanted to kind of match what the federal government had and be consistent. On page 49, we did expand the definition, add a little bit of wording, okay, on the two-way divided positive median barrier. We added the wording, 2 roadways are divided by an protective concrete, metal, or other type of longitudinal manufactured barrier. A two-way barrier is not a forest between the southbound lanes and the northbound lanes. That is basically what we wanted to clarify. Law enforcement was saying it was a barrier. Maybe you've got, I know there's some areas close to here where kind of the highway splits and you've got trees and a forest in between it. Not an official barrier. It needs to be man-made, concrete, manufactured. Page 50 and 51, we did not change the definition at all to perpendicular, angled, skewed. We just grouped them together. Again, we wanted to be a little bit more consistent with what MUC had. So road alignment, road profile, road condition, road surface, all roadway. It's just cosmetic. We're going to go over those new codes later. Page 51, fields, roadway condition, light condition, roadway surface, weather, or environmental conditions. Because we have added some new data fields, we needed a little bit of real estate on the crash report. So in some situations where you had checkboxes, now law enforcement is going to have drop-downs. We needed that real estate on the crash report. This is one such example. So now we have these fields that are checkboxes, that were checkboxes that are now going to be codes. And their vendors will take care of that for them. Okay, 51, we changed the field from weather condition to weather environmental condition. Let me give you an example of why we did this. Sounds very minor. So we may have a crash across a major interstate that is affected by a farmer that's burning their fields off, okay? Maybe the wind shifts. So now we have smoke going over the highway and we have a large crash. That is not accurately a weather condition. It was an environmental condition. So now we can accurately obtain that data, and that was an actual case that happened. Okay, page 52. We added a list of inclusions and exclusions related to damage to property other than vehicles. Okay, so it includes injury to domestic animals that have monetary value. damage to trees, shrubs, crops, or property of determined value. Government property such as highway signs, guardrails, lamp poles. Damage to a pedicycle with or without a pedicyclist. Damage to a pedestrian conveyance with or without a pedestrian. Injury to an animal being ridden by a person. Injury and damage to an animal-drawn conveyance with or without a person. Again, animal with a rider or animal-drawn conveyance with the driver is no longer recorded as a vehicle and driver, which is what they are now. The information on the injured animal and damaged conveyance will now be recorded in Section 3 and the occupants in Section 5. Includes damage to an other transport device occupied by an other non-motorist. We're going to go over these in detail, I promise. Do we have any questions so far? Okay, we shall keep going. So examples of other transport devices and occupied by other non-motorists. Riding that lawnmower off the traffic way. I am mowing my own grass. Someone comes off the road and hits me, does damage to my other transport device. A farm tractor engaged in planting a field. A bulldozer engaged in excavating off the traffic way. So these are all things that can be damaged that officers are going to have to document. It does not include property that is in or on a motor vehicle or railway vehicle. This goes back to earlier. It does not include property that has fallen from a motor vehicle or railway vehicle in transport but has not come to rest. Okay? If it hasn't come to rest yet, it's still attached to my vehicle with that imaginary string. Okay, so now we are going to go into the non-motorist piece. So this is where we're going to be expanding the pedestrian. Okay, it's no longer going to be pedestrian only. So we're going to break out what kind of pedestrians and other non-motorists are going to be statistically captured. So the other non-motorist piece is going to include pedestrians, pedicyclists, and other non-motorists. Okay, the motor vehicle crashes involving pedicyclists or animal-drawn vehicles, animals ridden for transport will no longer be recorded in Section 7. They'll be recorded in Section 3 and 5. So we're just breaking that out. Occupants of a motor vehicle will still be recorded in Section 7. Drivers, vehicles, owners, and occupants of railway vehicles will still be recorded in railway vehicle trash continuation supplement form. Okay, so let's dive into this expanded piece. So this is the largest piece that we've modified on this crash report so far. If you have a crash that does not involve any of these, they select NA. It's going to void everything else out. They can just move on with the crash report. However, if their crash involves something that is not a motor vehicle in transport, it could be a pedestrian on personal conveyance, pedicyclists, or other non-motorists. So we're going to ask law enforcement to break that out a little bit. Pedestrian. One of the things in the highway safety world that we see, especially in the wintertime, even though there are messages that go out continuously when we are preparing for a snowstorm, we're getting all the emergency operations going, the media will always push out, if you are in a crash, please stay in your vehicle belted. It's the safest place for you. So what we're seeing is people not doing that. So we want to be able to maybe modify our media. What can we do to make sure these people are staying in the safest place that they can? So what we would like to know is, were they a prior motor vehicle occupant? Unexpected pedestrian. Okay? So let's look at page 55 and 54, pedestrian. Prior motor vehicle occupant indicates if a person involved in the crash was a previous occupant of a motor vehicle just prior to their involvement in the crash. Okay? The key to marking yes is if the pedestrian was a motor vehicle occupant whose planned travel was interrupted by an event resulting in their decision to become a pedestrian prior to the crash. Okay, so if I'm fixing my tire, okay, if I've run out of gas or I'm having mechanical issues, if I was involved in a previous crash, if I'm assisting someone else. What this does not include is pedestrians who are serving a special function or an activity, such as law enforcement, fire, EMS, MoDOT worker, traffic worker. It's also not going to include if someone was walking to work. Okay, they were never an unexpected pedestrian. Okay, so those examples of no are if you're at a school drop-off location or you're walking to school, if you're running for exercise, if you're from a designated parking location, you're walking to transit, things like that. So we really want to hone in on, was this person an unintentional pedestrian? Okay. Pedestrian on personal conveyance. We are seeing a lot more of these electric scooters in your larger metropolitan areas. They're not documented very well on the crash report. We didn't have them in 2012 when the crash report was redone. So we need a better way to work with these companies to make sure that that person on the personal conveyance is staying safe, but also the motoring public is aware that they're out there. So personal conveyance, we're going to cover those codes in a little bit. Pedicyclist. Okay, so a pedicyclist is on the motorized pedicycle. Is it going to be no, electric, gas, or other? We added other because we don't know what technology is coming down the pipe for these to run on. So always have an other. Okay, so this is more for our rural areas where we have our Mennonites, our Amish communities, our trail riding communities. If you have an other non-motorist, we would also like to know, was that person an occupant of an animal or an animal-drawn device? Yes or no? So that's the big piece of how we're breaking out. So because we've broke these out like this, it affects a lot of the other pieces of the crash report, and we're going to cover that in just a little bit. Okay, pedestrian special function. Identifies pedestrians on page 56 of the preparation manual. Identifies pedestrians involved in the crash that are engaged in a specific function or activity. This does not apply to pedicyclists or other non-motorists. We added tow operator, EMS, and fire. One of the things I want you to remember is there is a consistency when you're looking at law enforcement, tow operator, EMS, and fire. In order to be categorized as a pedestrian special function, they have to be on duty and acting in official capacity, all of them. Okay, if you have an EMS person who is off duty, they do not fall under pedestrian special function. They just happen to be there. They need to be on duty and in official capacity. We did have a question arise, what about your volunteer firefighters? They are always on duty. Okay, so if you have a volunteer firefighter who is struck as a pedestrian, they are on and in official capacity. Have you ever known a volunteer fire department person to be off? Like off duty. They're always on. So they're going to be considered as the other traffic way worker. Okay, so as well as having number 1, number 2, number 3 for motor vehicles, we also are going to have them for non-motorists. So that is captured on page 56. It's just the unique number assigned to the non-motorist. Okay, safety devices, again, for non-motorists. We do have non-motorists that use safety devices. So enter up to 3 codes to indicate the type of safety device used, if any, by the non-motorist. You could have a bicyclist that has reflective clothing, a helmet, and a light. Okay, they are out there. So we would like to capture as many of those safety devices as possible. Location. With the pedestrians, we are seeing an increase in people crossing roads mid-block. No crosswalk. Okay, no lights, no nothing. So we wanted to capture that data a little bit better. So what we did was we took away on roadway, off roadway, on median crossing island, and we added them back, but with a little bit more detail. On roadway, within crosswalk intersection. Were they legitimately at a crosswalk intersection when they were struck? On roadway, outside crosswalk intersection. These are going to capture all of those pedestrian injury or fatals where it is just the middle of the street and they're crossing, or interstate crossers, state highway crossers, okay? Right now, there really wasn't a way for us to hone in on those statistics very quickly. It was all in the narrative, and that is very difficult when you're trying to pull statistics together. So now we're going to know very, very quickly. Okay, we also reapplied and modified the on-median separator crossing island. Okay, so let's look at that one. It is on page 58. The non-motorist was either in a median separator or crossing island when struck. Shoulder roadside. That one explains itself quite well. Non-traffic area. The non-motorist was not physically located on any area component of the traffic way when struck. For example, a person in a parking stall of a parking lot, a yard, or a person in a closed portion of a work zone or in a house. Shared use path or trail. We talked about these a little earlier with the pedicyclist section. So the non-motorist was on a shared use path or trail when struck. It's a trail or bikeway physically separated from motor vehicle traffic by an open space or a barrier, which can also be used by pedestrians, skaters, wheelchair users, joggers, and other non-motorized users. Or other. Okay, so if none of those apply, then we would use the other. Bicycle lane facility. So we are going to, in a little bit, we're going to get to them. This identifies the type of bicycle lane or bicycle facility the non-motorist was in when struck. So if they were in one, we're going to document that, and they have codes. So crossing the road, if we look at page 59, crossing the road with flashing beacon, that piece was added. Mark if a flashing beacon was present and operating / flashing when the non-motorist was crossing the road. A flashing beacon is a traffic control device designed to help individuals safely cross roadways. These are mid-block crossings. If you're familiar with any college campus, they probably have a mid-block crossing. Uptown here in Jefferson City, mid-block crossing. There is no intersection, but they are allowed to cross. We're seeing a lot more of those with your municipalities who are really, trying to revitalize their downtown area, make it safer for college students and things like that. So we do have with flashing beacon. So crosswalk, page 60. Okay, we changed the attribute values pertaining to the crosswalk. Intersection marked crosswalk. Mark if the non-motorist was crossing the road within a marked crosswalk that is at an intersection and not mid-block. So this is a true marked crosswalk intersection. Intersection unmarked crosswalk. Mark if the non-motorist was crossing at a road at an intersection not mid-block in an unmarked crosswalk. This is an area that contains a crossing or connection of 2 or more roadways, not classified as a driveway access, but without distinct markings for non-motorist crossings indicated by lines or other markings on the surface of the road. Okay, mid-block, marked crosswalk. Mark if the non-motorist was crossing a road within a marked crosswalk and the crosswalk is not at an intersection. Okay, so these are going to be what we just talked about earlier, where you have your municipalities wanting to build up the downtown area and they're putting crosswalks mid-block. Okay, maybe they're seeing a large amount of college students downtown and they're wanting to give them a safer place mid-block to cross. So that's where this would apply. Mid-block, no crosswalk. Mark if the non-motorist was crossing a road at the location other than an intersection and not in a designated crosswalk. This is everywhere else. Okay, these are your city street, mid-block, no crosswalk, no nothing. I'm going to cross. Interstates, state routes where somebody's crossing the road. That's where all of those crashes are going to be designated. Okay, so in actions, considering this section is for the non-motorists, we added a few. So it is, instead of going to walking, running, and traffic way, it's going to be walking, running, cycling, riding, and traffic way. We need to pick up those non-motorists. Okay, and then within that, we're going to have with traffic or against traffic. Actions, some of the attributes value definitions pertain to all non-motorists, and some only pertain to the pedestrian. Okay, so the ones that only pertain to the pedestrian, you're going to be pushing, working on vehicle. That's only going to apply to pedestrians. Okay, 61, we added the attribute going to or from transit. Okay, a lot of your metropolitan transportation working groups would like to know this. Is there a better way that we can gather the going to or from transit to help those people who have no transportation, who rely on city transportation? Is there another way that we can help them? So that is where this change came from. Page 61, 62, probable contributing circumstances. Considering Section 5 pertains to non-motorists, we added or modified several attribute values that relate to the various non-motorist types, pedestrians, pedicyclists, or other non-motorists. Probable contributing circumstances, they include failure to obey traffic signs, signals, or officers. These are going to apply to that non-motorist. These are things that they can do to contribute to their own probable contributing circumstances. Improper lane use or change. I am looking for that. Okay, page 61. So improper lane use. Mark if from improper lane use or improper lane change by the non-motorist contributed to the crash. This does not include instances where the non-motorist is making a turning movement. Okay, another thing that non-motorists could do would be travel wrong way. Mark if the non-motorist was proceeding the wrong way in a one-way street or highway. That could atone to a pedicyclist, horse and buggy, things like that. Not visible, that pedestrian non-motorists can be non-visible. Not wearing clothing that can be seen easily at night. They could also improper turn. Mark if an improper turn on the part of the non-motorist contributed to the crash. Turning from a straight only lane would be considered an improper turn. Do not mark in instances where the non-motorist is changing from one lane to another. Improper passing. Mark if improper pass overtaking by the non-motorist of another vehicle going the same direction contributed to the crash. Improper signal. That one's pretty straightforward. Improper backing. Following too close. Mark if the pedicyclist or other non-motorist followed another vehicle too closely and this contributed to the crash. Improper start from park. Pedicyclist or other non-motorist was parked in the improper start from the parked position contributed to the crash. Or in roadway improperly standing, lying, working, playing, stopped. You have that pedestrian. Mark if the non-motorist was on the roadway improperly, or when not directed to do so by a traffic control device or law enforcement officer. So page 66 of the preparation manual is kind of where we're going to start out here. The number, the vehicle driver or operator number assigned to the investigator. We removed other transport device from this definition. Screen did not change, just removed it from the definition. Endorsements. One of the things that we only categorize now, we only capture is motorcycle endorsements. We do not capture other endorsements that are on the Missouri driver's license. Okay? So we changed this from specifically motorcycle endorsements to all endorsements. All endorsements on a driver's license. You could have hazmat endorsement. Okay? You can have motorcycle, you have commercial motor vehicle. If there's more than 2 endorsements on a driver's license, please, we're asking law enforcement to capture the one that applies to the crash. Okay, if you have someone who has commercial motor vehicle endorsement and they have, or hazmat endorsement, and they have a motorcycle endorsement, and they're on their motorcycle, and they crash. We do not care about the hazmat endorsement. We care about the commercial, or about the motorcycle endorsements. We're telling law enforcement, you can add both of them, but if there's a third one, make sure we get the one that we need for that specific crash. Airbags. Currently we have combined deployment. Okay, one of the things that with safety ratings, with recalls, every vehicle you get into now pretty much has an airbag. So one of the things that NHTSA looks for is, are the airbags deploying correctly to save lives? If we're just using combination deployment, yep, they went off. We're not capturing that information. NHTSA physically comes down and does their own investigation. So we are breaking out those deployments. We change it from entry of 1 airbag to up to 4. Okay, if there is someone sitting in that seat, we would like to know which airbags around them deployed. And we do have a graph for them a little bit later. I know it's in the presentation, but it's in the book, so we definitely will see it, of the different types of airbags that could be in a vehicle. Some only have half of them, but your newer ones, they have airbags all around. What we don't care about is if there is nobody sitting in that seat. If I have no passenger, that officer does not need to document all the passenger airbags that deployed. Only if there is someone in the seat do we want that data. Indication of improper use. We are seeing, this is really hard to capture unless you're in the narrative. Let's say we have a crash where we have multiple children in a vehicle and maybe they're in the booster seats, they're in the carriers, but the carriers aren't attached to the car. If you have someone who has a shoulder and a lap belt, but they put the shoulder belt behind them. You have a motorcycle rider who wears a helmet but does not strap it underneath their chin. Okay? These are all improper use. What can we do to make sure the education is better for the public? We can mark improper use. Okay? So that is what this is going to entail. If the officer cannot tell, that's okay. But if it's blatant, we really would like to know that information. Driver license restrictions. This is a new field that was added. We are seeing a heavy push nationwide in ignition interlock devices. Some states have ignition interlock devices required on first-time DWIs. I believe it was filed last year, but it didn't quite make it, but a lot of states are moving towards this. We are not asking the officer to make sure it is installed correctly. That is not their position during this role. What we would like to know is, do they have a restriction on their driver's license that indicates they need an ignition interlock? So driver's license restriction, alcohol interlock, required on license, yes or no? Okay? Beyond that, alcohol interlock present. We are not asking them to make sure it's hooked up correctly, but if it is in the trunk of the car and it is not hooked up, we would like to know that information. Okay? So this is strictly for that push of, a lot of states are wanting this first time. First time you get a DWI, you have an ignition interlock. Okay, insurance companies provided some clarification on entering insurance company name in cases where proof of insurance is not required. An entry of NA is not applicable. So enter insurance company's name as shown on proof of insurance. If proof is not required and is not shown, the insurance company's name should be entered to facilitate claim processing only by the crash victim. Not required, must be marked for proof of insurance. So just a little clarification on that. Colors, we will always be changing these with any modification that we do. There are always new colors. So in order to follow the NCIC standard, the color abbreviations was modified. License plate number, state, and year. We revised the instructions pertaining to a temporary license and a permit. Enter the license plate or temporary license permit number. So your temp tags now have numbers. We would like that to be entered into this field. We'd also like for it to be marked temp tag. So temporary tag, there would be a checkbox there. So on page 76, vehicle damage field, we changed the attribute to towed unit to trailer towed unit for consistency with other fields on the crash report. Okay, this is a little new. 2012, we really didn't have ride-hailing, electronic ride-hailing. We've always had taxis, we've always had public transportation, but your Lyft and your Ubers and all of those were still in their infancy. So we have left alone vehicle use as public conveyance. We have added vehicle use for electric ride-hailing transportation network company. Okay, so Mark if the motor vehicle is being used for electric ride hailing at the time of the crash. That is key. If I am a college student and I do Lyft in the evenings, when I'm driving to class, I am no. It is not being used for that. But the second I get out of class and I look at my device and I see that I've been called to a location, I am on duty. From the moment that I get that notification to the time that I drop that person off, if I am in a crash, vehicle used for electric ride hailing will be marked. But if I'm going to the grocery store by myself, that is my own vehicle, that's not going to be marked. So there is going to be a difference in that. And that, again, is just going to be a conversation that law enforcement is going to have with the people involved with the crash. Vehicle body types, we add or modified passenger van less than 9 seats, includes a passenger van with seating capacity of less than 9, and does not include cargo vehicles. This also includes minivans. Okay, so this is basically a box on wheels, enclosed passenger area, step-up floor, and relatively short hood. 9 to 12 passenger van, and then your 15 passenger vans. We also have motorized bicycle or moped. Any 2 or 3 wheel device having an automatic transmission and a motor with a cylinder capacity of no more than 50 cubic centimeters, capable of producing less than 3 gross brake horsepower and propelling the device no faster than 35 miles an hour on level ground. Autocycle, large motorcycle with 1 rear wheel and 2 front wheels with either a saddle and handlebars or seats and a steering wheel that can be fully enclosed, partially closed, or unenclosed. Recreational off-highway vehicles, ROVs, also known as UTVs. They are the same thing. Intended to be used on terrain similar to that in which all-terrain vehicles are used, except these have a steering wheel instead of a handlebar, bench or bucket seats instead of the straddle seating, and foot controls for throttle and braking instead of levers located on the handlebar. These are your UTVs. You are seeing a huge push in municipalities allowing these on their city streets, as long as they're insured and the drivers have, I believe most municipalities are seat belts, but they can be driven, they are being driven on county roads. You know, that we are seeing a huge increase in fatals on these. So we needed to define them a little bit better. We removed truck tractor with no units through truck tractor with 3 units and changed it to truck tractor. And we replaced we replaced it with the number of trailer towed units. So you're going to have a truck tractor, and if it's being towed by anything, you're going to put in 1 or 2. Some areas, I believe Kansas City does allow for 3, so they would be documenting that. I'm going to cover that in just a little bit. This applies to all body types. This has to be filled out. Okay, we're getting a lot where there were towed units that weren't entered, so this is a mandatory field. If there are no trailered units, attach the vehicle NA and U if unknown. Okay, so we added to the report to record the specific information on the trailer or towed units. Officers were adding the trailer unit that was damaged in Section 7 when the tractor wasn't damaged. So they were putting the trailer where the tractor information should be. So this was added to keep the tractor information in one area and the trailered information in another. If you are in the Kansas City area and you do have the ordinances that allow for 3 trailered units, you add your first 2 trailered units here, and then that 3rd trailer is going to go in the narrative. So in the Kansas City area should be the only place that you should see that, unless, years down the road, municipalities allow 3 trailered units in their area. Okay, these fields are completed anytime a trailer towed unit is attached to a vehicle, regardless of whether the towed unit is damaged or not. Completed also if the unit is disengaged from the power unit. When your trailer or towed unit is damaged, then this is where your information is going to go. And I apologize, I got a little ahead of myself. This is where we say if you have more than 2 trailers, put the third in the narrative. Automation systems. Okay, so your automation systems on 83, page 83. The hardware and software that are collectively capable of performing part or all of the dynamic driving task on a sustained basis. This term is generally used to describe any system capable of a level 1 through 5 driving automation. Dynamic driving task. The operation, so that is going to include steering, braking, accelerating, monitoring the vehicle and roadway. And the tactical, responding to events, determining when to change lanes, when to turn, and when to use signals. Aspect of the driving task, but not the strategic aspect. Strategic is basically your map quest. This is how you need to get from point A to point B. Your dynamic driving task is everything that it takes that vehicle to get you from point A to point B. It has to steer, it has to keep you in the lanes, it has to brake, it has to be able to decide what to do if you're not going to, and there are different levels of that. We are encouraging law enforcement to do the best you can with this because automation is not going away. Whether we like it or not, whether it's difficult or not for law enforcement to gather this information, it's here to stay. And we need to make sure that we're depicting these crashes the best way we can for safety for the future. Every vehicle I'm sure that you've ever been in has some type of automation, unless you are in Grandpa's 1955 fill in the blank. Okay? They all have a level of automation. Your cruise control is a level of automation. We don't think about it, but it is. So during the event of the crash, we are asking law enforcement to try and determine, and you're going to get this basically from just conversations with the drivers. Was there a certain level that was turned on during that time? So the first question the officer is going to ask is, does it have automation? Yes or no? 90% of the time it's going to be yes. And then we need to figure out the level. So we're going to go through these. At the end, we'll have some more examples. This is a whole lot easier to read than what it usually is. So our levels of driving automation. So level 0, 1, and 2. And this is on page 85. Okay? So 0, 1, and 2. What does the human in the driver's seat have to do? So for these levels, you are driving. That vehicle is not driving itself. You're driving. Even if your feet are off the pedals and you're not steering, you're driving. Okay, you must constantly supervise these support features. You must steer, brake, or accelerate as needed to maintain safety. Okay, so what do these features do? So your level 0. Level 0 may sound to you like it has nothing, but this is actually a level of automation. Your vehicles that have nothing, the officer is going to write no. But once they say yes, we're into the levels. So what's it do? Your automatic emergency braking, blind spot warning, lane departure warning. If your vehicle does that, you have a level 0. Okay, a level 1. These features provide steering, and the key word is, and it's in bold, or braking, one or the other. Okay, your vehicle provides steering or braking, brake acceleration to support the driver. Well, what is brake acceleration? That is your cruise control that keeps you from hitting the person in front of you. You don't have to tap your brakes and turn your cruise control off when you get a little close to that person. It automatically does it for you. So there's a certain distance that your vehicle will keep you from the vehicle in front of you. So you either have steering support or adaptive cruise control, but not both. That is key. You also have lane centering or adaptive cruise control, it says at the bottom. So let's come back up. What do these features do on a level 2? You have both. You have lane centering and adaptive cruise control. So technically, your car is assisting you, keeping you in the lane, and it's also assisting you, keeping you from hitting the person in front of you when your cruise control is on. Okay, on at the same time. Let's move on to these level 3s, 4s, and 5s. Believe it or not, they're here. Okay, the 3s and 4s are definitely here. The 5s are getting a little closer. So what does the human in the seat and in the driver's seat have to do for a level 3, 4, or 5? So this is the human. You are not driving when these automated driving features are engaged. Even if you're sitting in the driver's seat, you are hands off. Okay, now there are certain levels of it. So level 3, let's kind of drop down. What does the human do? You're not driving, but when your vehicle requests that you have to drive, you have to drive. Okay, when these features request, you must grab the steering wheel and put your foot on the brake. These are automated driving features. What do these do? Level 3 and 4. These features can drive the vehicle under limited conditions and will not operate unless all conditions are met. Your traffic jam chauffeur, your large cities, we're going to say AKA like San Francisco, New York. They have traffic jam chauffeurs. If you're coming up, you're coming into work and you're coming into the big city, it will detect the best route for you and it just does it. It takes you to it, okay? Level 4, local driverless taxis. These are out there, okay? I want you to Google sometime San Francisco driverless taxis and just read some of the stories, okay? Pedals and steering wheel may or may not be included. So you get in a vehicle and there's nothing, and they take you to your destination. It's going to be a little bit longer before we see them in Missouri and especially in our rural areas, but they are here. So we need to document those. I know the federal government is really watching those companies to make sure that they're reporting things correctly, but there is so much more that we can do on the law enforcement side that we need to make sure that we're trying to capture. Okay, at the very last, level 5, example features, same as level 4, but it can do anything under all conditions. It can drive in a snowstorm and you do not have to take over. Okay, so it is you in a computer. No pedals, no steering wheel, no brakes. It's you. So we're seeing a little bit of difficulty in getting data from this just because the normal public is not educated on each levels. They go into a dealership and they say, hey, what feature do I want? Okay, but the regular rest of us are like, we have no idea what level that is. So it's going to be it can be done, but law enforcement is just going to have to get that information via conversations and just do the best they can. It's here whether we like it. So we're going to have to document it as best we can. Okay, so if the officer has marked yes, then on the crash report, their vendor, if they're electronic or if they're doing the fillable PDF, they will need to select which level was engaged at the time of the crash. I don't care if it's a Tesla. If that person was driving at 100%, they were driving at 100%. Okay, no, then you're not going to go further into the levels. Okay? If it's no, then they don't have to worry about this. Okay, we covered that guide. Now, here's the next key. Did the driver cede control? Okay, so my vehicle has the adaptive cruise control. I am not ceding control. I'm still in control of my vehicle. I am still driving it. I'm still maintaining my lane. I'm watching for traffic. Most of the time, officers are going to be entering no, but there is going to be the Tesla that they're driving themselves. I'm sorry, the car is driving themselves. That's where they cede control. They have given control up to drive that vehicle. Okay? Any questions on the technology? This is going to be a learning curve for all of us. Okay, Terry, you do have a question. I am going to repeat it when you ask it so the recording can pick it up.
On the crash report, who will you put for the driver? Like if the driver's sitting in the driver's seat?
Driver, Missouri state law always indicates there has to be a driver. I believe there will be a driver, even if it is an automated vehicle, they are still required to be the driver. Yeah, so the question was, who's going to be the driver if it's one of those completely automatic vehicles? And I believe state law has to supersede that and say that we're allowed to do it. I know Arkansas has driverless vehicles on their Walmart fleet, but I believe it was past state law. So, any more questions?
On those vehicles that can drive themselves, like the Teslas,
Mm-hmm.
I was talking with someone who, his wife owns one. He says even though that it's set to drive itself, they still have a motion sensor on the steering wheel that they still have to have their hand on it.
Yes, there
at all
are.
times.
Yeah, there are settings, and so these close to fully automated vehicles do say you have to touch the steering wheel ever so often if there's an alarm that goes off. What happens after that alarm, I don't know, but they are still supposed to be in control of that vehicle.
Okay.
So when it comes to who's in control, the computer or the person, that person is still supposed to be in control of that vehicle.
Okay. I'm just,
That is, yeah. But eventually, there's not going to be a steering wheel. It's just going to be,
because he says that they have to keep their hand on. If they take it off, it will throw the sensor. It'll throw it. Even though that
That's
it
good
is
to know.
self-driving
That-
itself.
yeah. And I think just technology hasn't gotten there. And the liability is still there. There's a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Any other questions? It's going to be a learning curve for all of us. Law enforcement, data analysts, you guys, quality control. It's going to be interesting. Okay, page 85. Emergency vehicle involvement. This field indicates operation of any motor vehicle equipped with emergency lights and/or sirens that is legally authorized under 304-022 RSMO to respond to emergencies with or without the use of emergency warning lights. So we clarified if a law enforcement officer marks other, they have to mark A or B. Is an emergency vehicle on an emergency run, or is it stationary with emergency equipment activated? So a clarification with law enforcement on that side. Okay, page 86, item 7C, we clarified that the sequence of events ends with the final rest or the end of the unstabilized event. Okay, we've always clarified what the beginning of an unstabilized event is, but we've never clarified how to stop that event. So this is a clarification on that definition. We would run into situations where an officer would document the unstabilized event, but then continue the documentation, like they drove further down the road, and then there was another unstabilized event, and they drove further down the road. Those are separate events. So we're stopping that unstabilized event. Marijuana use. We knew this was coming back in 2019 when we started. Medical marijuana was getting pretty close, or maybe it had already passed. And historically, usually with medical comes recreational. And here we are. So much like alcohol use, not a level of intoxication, but use only. Probable contributing circumstances, we changed the field from checkboxes. We needed real estate. This is all we did. So it's no longer checkboxes. Now it's going to be codes. So the law enforcement agencies, vendors will be taking care of that for them. Ooh, I apologize. Page 88 added the definition of work zone related. We talked about this a little bit later. As it relates to the location of the crash. So we want to document those a little bit more. Workers present. We added the wording, this includes workers in or on a working motor vehicle, equipment, etc., or off such devices standing on their feet, sitting, or lying. We were having a little inconsistency with law enforcement telling us whether workers were present. They could be on their lunch break. And maybe law enforcement was saying, well, workers weren't present because they were kind of, not right by the road. If they're present, they're present. Doesn't matter if they're on their lunch, if they're in a vehicle, if they're under a vehicle, they are present. Type of work zone. This is new. That identifies the type of work zone in relation to the motor vehicle crash. So, type of work zone, let's look at some of those. Lane closures. The closure of a lane in one direction of a roadway. Lane shift or crossover involves the lateral shift of vehicular traffic from the original travel lane. Intermittent or moving work zone. Okay, those are constantly moving down the road. They may be temporarily stopped, but they're going to pick up and move very quickly. Working on shoulder or the median, or an other type of work zone. Location of the crash. We went over some of these definitions earlier at the very beginning. So this is a new field that identifies the location of the crash in association with the work zone. Okay, so before the work zone, warning sign in the advanced warning area. So that, and there's a graph on page 91 that'll kind of show you the workspace, your transition area. Law enforcement present. Okay, so we've had a lot of questions on clarifications on this one. Law enforcement present means if a law enforcement agency maybe has a MoDOT work zone enforcement grant out of that MoDOT district. So your bigger work zones in your metropolitan areas will have these. I think I saw at the construction we had just outside of town, I think I saw law enforcement present once. That means they are sitting there doing specific law enforcement work zone enforcement. They don't have to be actively running radar. They could be there for presentation only. They could be doing paperwork in their car. We do not care. If they are present and present for the work zone, they are law enforcement work zone present, yes. If they happen to pull someone over in that work zone and there is a crash, completely separate from pulling that car over, law enforcement present, no. They're not actively there for the work zone. Their focus is somewhere else. We need to document if the work zone grants that we have and larger law enforcement agencies are using are working and slowing people down in the work zone. If they're not, we have to reevaluate where we're putting the funding to make sure the workers stay safe, the motorists don't crash, and law enforcement can stay safe themselves. So that's why we're asking law enforcement present, yes. But that law enforcement officer needs to be focused solely on traffic control, speed control in the work zone, not working on something else, not working a crash and not writing a citation for someone else. Does that make sense? We've been really hard in differentiating because there's a lot of larger areas that use these work zone grants just to slow people down in the work zones. In association to work zones, we had the traffic control field inside the work zone, and there was a little bit of confusion. So what we did was we pulled the traffic control piece out of the work zone and made it its own separate field. It has nothing to do with the work zone, but it kind of looked like on the crash report that it was embedded in the work zone, and it's not. So we made it its own field. We also added that green, yellow, red. We added wording that this does include solid and flashing yellow arrows. If it is part of that light cycle, then it is an electric light, standard traffic signal. Airbag. Okay, now this is for the occupants. We talked about the airbag for the driver, and this is for the occupants. If there's a passenger or someone in the back seat, we do wish law enforcement would document which airbags deployed for that person. So this just includes occupants. Also, not only for the driver, we talked about this earlier, this is for the occupants, was there improper use of safety devices? Okay, that goes for motorcycles, helmet riders, that goes for the shoulder strap being behind them, and it goes for putting the kids in the pumpkin seat and just sitting them in the seat and not attaching it correctly to the car. Roadway conditions, we changed mud, dirt, and sand. We changed mud, dirt, and sand, gravel to mud, dirt, gravel, and sand. Minor change. Roadway surface, we do acknowledge that there are some roadway surfaces that occur in this state that maybe we did not have listed, so we did add an other. Light condition, dawn, dusk. So dawn describes the transition period going from dark of night to a daylight condition, typically 30 minutes before the sun rises, and the same applies at dusk. Describes the transition period going from daylight to dark and is typically from sunset to 30 minutes after. Where could this be used? So I live in a rural area, but I live close to a large intersection. We actually have lights. So if we did not have lights and we were seeing a lot of crashes during that dawn to dusk area, it's really hard to depict, especially since we are a daylight savings time state. Well, it may have been August, it may have been 9 o'clock at night. Was that really dawn or dusk? If we have that for the officers to mark, we can pull those statistics very, very quickly, and those regional planning commissions can say, hey, we really need some lights in this area because this officer is saying consistently there are crashes at dusk or crashes at dawn. It's completely a safety feature. So that's where this comes into play. So blowing snow and smoke or smog were added. I want to go back to that situation I talked about earlier where maybe you have a farmer who's burning off a field and they live close to an interstate. We did not have a good way to depict smoke or smog, so now we do. And when it comes to blowing snow, let's face it, we live in Missouri. We don't just get snow. Sometimes we get sideways snow. That plays in effect to how first responders respond, how law enforcement works. So we did add a blowing snow. Seat location, we added the following attributes. These are on page 105 and 106. We added VE, riding on motor vehicle exterior. Okay, hood surfers is a good example of that. Riding on the exterior. Sleeper section of cab shows occupants in the sleeper section of a truck cab. A sleeper section is generally in the back portion of a truck trailer where the occupants can sleep. And trailing unit shows occupants in or on the trailing unit or towed unit of the vehicle. Train and crew passengers should be shown as RC or CP respectively. We have these crashes a lot. We just didn't have a good option for them. Injury. Okay, there's a little bit of a history that goes back to this. So we have changed suspected minor injury. We've added suspected minor injury, just a little bit of a change. So a minor injury is evident at the scene of the crash, other than fatal or serious. Examples include lump on the head, abrasions, bruises, minor lacerations, cuts on the skin. So we don't suspect that there's anything serious. Everything cognitive is okay. Suspected minor injury. Okay, possible injury is an injury reported or claimed which is not a fatal or suspected serious injury or minor injury. Examples include memory loss of consciousness, claim of injury, limping, or complaint or of pain or nausea. Okay, we didn't see it happen. We can't physically see it, but we know something has happened. Okay, so law enforcement will be able to depict that possible injury. No apparent injury. This one's self-explanatory. Obviously, it's not fatal. It's not suspected serious, suspected minor, or possible injury. Okay, so one of the things that happened pre-COVID is the federal government said, hey, we want you to change your definition of suspected serious injury. It's very rare that the federal government comes in and says, we want you to do this and we're going to give you a deadline to do it. They really don't do it a lot. So when they came in, all states by January 1, 2019 had to add suspected serious injury and use their definition. What was lost in a little bit of communication is that we also needed this right here, parentheses A. So I was at a conference actually with Russ. I don't know if Captain, I can't remember if you were there or not. And the federal government was like, hey, everybody, did you get your suspected serious injury? And all the states were like, yes, we did. Hey, did you put the A in parentheses? No. So a lot of the states didn't do that. So they were gracious enough to not penalize any of the states. So we just decided with this crash rewrite, we're going to put all the letters in there. So it does spell CABCO, but that means nothing to you or law enforcement. It's a coding behind the scenes, and it's just what NHTSA uses. So now we have all the letters, all the parentheses, and all the updated injury codes. Airbag. Because we are asking for each airbag deployment, we took out airbag combination. 4 codes can be entered to indicate the status of the airbag for each vehicle occupant. Okay, and here's that picture I was talking about earlier. Some cars have all of these, some cars don't. The more advanced car you have, the more airbag opportunities there are. So for law enforcement and for us also, we made sure we kind of depicted where these airbags are and how they deploy. And again, if there is no occupant in that seat, we do not want that airbag information. Only for drivers and occupants. Safety devices, we added the following attributes. We are on 110 and 111. Child restraint, type unknown. There are going to be instances where maybe there's some kind of new restraint and law enforcement really isn't quite aware of it yet, so we are allowing them to add unknown. We want them to do the best that they can with that. Okay, stretcher. If we look on page 111, stretcher restraining system. You cannot have a safety device of stretcher if you do not have both of these. Your stretcher restraining system, original equipment provided by the stretcher manufacturer that secures the patient restraining member and the attaching hardware. Okay, so your stretcher restraining system, if I'm on a stretcher, I am not restrained on that stretcher until I'm strapped into the stretcher. Makes perfect sense. Take that a step further. Stretcher retention system, a system that provides means for securing a stretcher to the floor and or sidewall of the vehicle. I am not in a stretcher restraining system unless I am attached to the vehicle. Okay? If I am in an ambulance and I am not attached to the floor, or if I am in a one of the specialized minivans, okay, that can handle the wheelchair, they have an apparatus to attach them to the vehicle. It is not a stretcher, an official safety device of stretcher, unless the person is attached to the stretcher and the stretcher is attached to the vehicle. Okay, you have to have both of those. So I know I mentioned wheelchair earlier. The same thing applies. If you are in a wheelchair, you are not attached to the wheelchair. It is not an official wheelchair restraint system unless you are attached to the wheelchair and the wheelchair is attached to the vehicle. That could be a school bus. That could be a minivan. Lighting, the bottom of page 111, a non-motorist's use of lights on his or her person on a pedicycle, personal conveyance. So some bicyclists have the lighting on their bicycles. Okay, so that is a safety device. Reflectors also, mark if the non-motorist used reflectors, a device that reflects the light back towards the source of light. Okay, we've talked about personal conveyances almost this entire session. So let's go over and look at some of these personal conveyance codes. Page 112 is where we're going to start. Scooter, mobility assistance motorized. Okay, these are not wheelchairs. These are scooters. The pedestrian was on a motorized, powered mobility assistance scooter at the time of the crash. Scooter stand-up motorized. These are the birds. These are the swipe your car downtown, and you can ride all over. Very prominent in your college areas. Okay, the pedestrian was on a stand-up motorized powered scooter, razor, or bird-like device. Stand-up non-motorized. Pedestrian was on a stand-up non-motorized device. So this is a skateboard, roller skates, rollerblades, kick scooter. Your old-fashioned, my right leg is wearing out because I'm kicking the scooter kind of scooter. Non-motorized. Stand-up motorized. These are hoverboards, segways, motorized skateboards. Those motorized skateboards are gaining popularity. Okay, much like the birds, they're out there. Stroller has its own category. A rideable toy also has its own category. Now, other. This is where your non-motorized wheelchairs, your, what's the word I'm looking for? Your scooters that have the seat on them, and then your wheelchairs apply. Okay, we're seeing a lot of pedestrians killed on these. Mainly mid-block, no crosswalk. Okay? So, page 114 and 115, bicycle lane facility. Here's where we're going to break down all the different kinds of bicycle lanes. Some of these are specifically on roadway, some of them are specifically off roadway, and some of them, depending on where the lines are painted in the road, could be on or off roadway. So we're going to cover each of those. Signed route, no pavement marking, a roadway designed as a preferred right for bicyclists. Okay, so these are, we prefer vehicles not to be on this route. Shared lane markings. A shared roadway with pavement markings providing wayfinding guidance to the bicyclist and alerting drivers that bicycles are likely to be operating in mixed traffic. Wayfinding, I like to think of that, those are the arrows. We're telling the bicyclists, go that way. You know, it's just go that way. Don't go the other way. So these are the bicycles, emblems that are painted over the same lanes that the cars drive over. Okay, they all share the same lane. On-street bike lanes. So on-street bike lanes, and I'm reading from the pictures on page 115, but we are going to reference back to 114. An on-road bicycle facility designated by striping, signage, and pavement markings. Okay, so this is the first example that can be on or off roadway. It is off roadway if the lane is immediately adjacent to the curb or edge of the roadway. It's on roadway if the bike lane is between lanes of travel. It is in the parking lane. So it can be either or. I rarely see that second piece, but they're out there. On-street buffered bike lanes. I'm going to go back over to page 115. Bike lanes with a painted buffer increase lateral separation between the bicyclists and motor vehicles. So this is where not only do we have a separate lane that's beside the driving lane, but it's kind of spaced over a little bit. So there's a little bit more of a protector between the bicyclists and the motoring public. But again, these can be on and off roadway. Off roadway when the lane is immediately adjacent to the curb or the edge of the roadway. On roadway if the bike lane is between lanes of travel. Between lanes of travel is the key between both of those last definitions. Okay, sometimes you can have bike lanes that are like in the middle of the north and southbound lanes, and sometimes they're going to be to the right. Most of the time they're going to be to the right, from what I've seen. Separated bike lanes. A separated bike lane is exclusive facility for bicyclists that is located within or directly adjacent to the roadway and that is physically separated from motor vehicle traffic with a vertical element. These are the safest. If you're going to ride with the motoring public, there is probably a concrete barrier that is in between the vehicle driving lane and the bicycle driving lane. Not a huge space, but there's a barrier that's going to keep that bicyclist safe. Off-street trails or side paths, these are like your Katy trails, bicycles only. You know, no motoring public. So these are far away from the motoring public to begin with. You know, they're out in the middle of nowhere, more of your countryside, things like that. Any questions about those? And there is always an other. An unknown and not applicable. There could be a bicyclist that's in an area that is not depicted in this, and that's where we're going to have them use the other. Endorsement codes. We talked about the endorsement codes. We're only looking at the motorcycle endorsement. These are all the endorsements that we would like to capture. One of the problems we ran into is there is not a nationwide generic standard of endorsement codes. We reached out to the Department of Revenue. They were on the committee. Each state really has their own endorsement codes. So we did the best we could. This is what Missouri is going to use for the crash report. If there's more than 2 endorsements on that person's driver's license, we are asking law enforcement to use the 2 that apply to the crash. More than likely, 1 is only going to apply to the crash, but please add both. Page 117, vehicle type codes. We removed the following since they will be recorded in sections 3 and 5. Petacycle, animal drawn vehicle. So let's continue on page 119 to 123, vehicle action sequence of events. We changed or added some attributes, okay? So we changed on page 119, changing merging lanes. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The vehicle was changing lanes or merging onto traffic, such as moving from one lane to another while going the same direction, moving from a straight ahead lane into a turn lane, drifting from one lane into another, going into the same direction. We also added a third example under excludes in the crosses road. So that third example on page 120 at the top, that third bulletin point. So crossroad excludes vehicles crossing the median into the opposite road or roadway, but does not entirely cross the road or roadway. Ran off roadway right. So because of some discrepancies that we were having, I hope I do my best to depict this for the video. But I want you to imagine on the car, the way that the vehicle is traveling. I do not care north, south, east, west. I do not care if they're driving the right way or the wrong way on the highway. I want you to take that vehicle, and if it is driving a certain way, put an arrow on top of that vehicle pointing that way. Okay, so when we get to the runoff roadway right, this very first example that we're looking at. So these are on page 20. This is a very easy example. You are driving down the road, you are going a certain way, and you run off the right side of the roadway. Okay, so this is a vehicle going straight on eastbound I-70, runs across the outside right roadway, which is that bottom roadway, onto the shoulder. Super simple, okay? So let's complicate it just a little bit more. So here we have a vehicle that is in control, and then it starts spinning. When it goes off of the roadway, it is facing the other direction. Okay? But I don't care, because the original way of that vehicle was eastbound. Okay, so this is a whole lot easier to depict in person. So I apologize for the video people, but we're going to pretend this is going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. That is the way they are going. It does not matter if they are turned backwards. They are still traveling that way. Okay, so the arrow is still pointing in the screen that you're looking at to the right. So it is ran off right side roadway. Let's add a little bit more difficulty in this. So we had some officers that were not consistent in this. I am a vehicle. I am westbound, but I apologize, I'm going straight in the wrong direction. So I'm actually traveling eastbound in the westbound lanes. I am still going in the way the screen lays out, from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. Does not matter if it's westbound, eastbound, northbound, southbound. I am going that way. So when I go off the roadway, I go off the right side. Okay? Even though they're going the wrong direction. They're going from the left side to the right side. They're going that way. When they go off that way on the side of the road, it's right side of roadway. Okay, just put an arrow on top of that car. Doesn't matter if it's westbound or eastbound, and that's the way they are traveling. Then you will determine left or right side of roadway. Okay, this one, we're going to throw that last example in here. So this one is backing. So this vehicle should be going westbound, but they're actually traveling, they should be going eastbound, but we don't care. They are traveling backwards. So in this scenario, this vehicle started from the right side of the screen, and it's traveling to the left side of the screen. We're going to put an arrow on that vehicle. It's actually traveling to the left of the screen, on the screen, so they run off the right side of the roadway. Put that arrow on the vehicle. Doesn't matter which direction they're supposed to be traveling. From the way the screen is showing, they're starting on the right, they're moving to the left. So if you put an arrow on that vehicle, they go off the right side of the roadway. There's just not a lot of consistency with law enforcement. There was a lot of back and forth in the committee about this. Okay? Ran off roadway left. The same thing applies. Same thing applies. So I put an arrow on the vehicle. We are westbound. So in this picture, the vehicle is going from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. The arrow is pointing to the left side of the screen. They run off roadway left. Okay, here we have the out of control vehicle where it's technically backwards when it runs off the roadway, but that does not matter. It is going from the right side of the road. It's going from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. So in that instance, put an arrow on the vehicle on the direction it's traveling, the way that it is traveling, and it runs off the left side of the roadway. And I promise I'll ask for questions when we're done with these last two examples. Okay, so here we have the wrong way driver. This driver is driving from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen, even though they shouldn't be. Okay, when they drive off the road, they go off the left side because of the way they are traveling. And then we have the person who is backing. So in this scenario, on your screen, you see the vehicle in the middle. This vehicle is traveling from the left side of the direction to the right side of your screen, okay? So they're traveling from left to right because you put an arrow on the vehicle and point them that direction. They go off the left side of the roadway. We do have instances where we don't know which way they traveled off, and we do account for that. Do we have any questions about that? We struggled for a little bit trying to explain this, and I had a clerk in one of my trainings was like, put an arrow on the vehicle, on the direction it's traveling. I was like, I'm using that for every presentation. We do not care which way you're supposed to be going or the direction of travel. Which way was the arrow pointing? Did they go off left or right? Trying to simplify it to where that all officers are reporting the same thing. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, cool. Jackknife, so this is the sequence of events. We've talked about this definition. So this is where it falls in the sequence of events. Also, thrown or falling object. Ran off roadway other. This is that situation where an officer may come up on a crash and they don't know which way this vehicle started out. If there's no way to depict that information, we do have the ran off roadway other. Collision involving other non-motorists. Struck by falling, shifting cargo, or anything set in motion by another motor vehicle. We did cover this definition. End departure. Okay, so end departure is going to be used when the motor vehicle leaves the roadway by traveling straight through a T intersection of a two-way traffic stop or an intersecting one-way roadway. This was, I believe, ran off roadway other, and it is going to be end departure for those T intersection crashes where they just drive straight through the T. Fixed object codes. So page 124. Utility pole guy wire. We do have situations where the utility pole is not hit, but the guy wire is. So we've combined those definitions. Construction for the primary function of supporting an electric line. If you have a situation where a vehicle hits the guy wire, this is what your option is going to be. Building roofed and walled structure. So I want you to think of a gas station. When you're getting your gas, you have the overhead that keeps you dry when you get your gas. Okay, that is not, even though that's a permanent facility, that is not considered a building because it has a roof, but it does not have walls. So a roof or walled structure, let me make sure I'm to the right page. A building on page 126, a roofed and walled structure for permanent use attached to the terrain, house, toll booth, pole barn, portable building attached to the terrain. Okay, it has to have a walled structure. Parking garages are a building. There was a little bit of a question in the beginning, but even though they don't have full walls, they do have structured walls. Probable contributing circumstances. Okay, on page 130, failure to obey traffic signs, signals, or officers. Mark if the driver failed to comply with the traffic signal or sign or the direction of an officer. We just changed these attributes slightly. Wrong way, mark if the motor vehicle was being driven the wrong way on a one-way street or highway, for instance, a vehicle traveling eastbound in the westbound lanes. Page 137, on the train damaged field, we changed code 21 towed unit to 21 trailer towed unit, just to be consistent with the earlier change that we made in the report. So if it applies to a vehicle, it's going to apply to the railway vehicle also. This also applies to railway vehicles. So there are situations where a vehicle on the railway will have an airbag. And it is not going to be the train, it's going to be that maintenance truck that has the two different sets of wheels so that they can drive on the highway, but they can also drive on the railway. They have airbags. So we really didn't have a way to depict that clearly. So we do have airbag for those vehicles. So law enforcement agencies, I'm going to tell you every single time we asked when we were on the road if a law enforcement agency uses the short form, nobody said yes. But we did go ahead and list in this presentation all the fields that were changed in the long form, that were changed in the short form. So I do want to just click through these. We're not going to discuss them because we've already talked about them. So these are all the fields, if you are a law enforcement agency that uses the short form, that have been modified. So I will slowly go through those. Okay, Appendix E on page 169. We changed the vehicle action sequence of events. This was the situation. This is a T intersection. Okay, it's not going to be end roadway other, or runoff roadway other, I apologize. It's going to be end departure. Okay, so that T intersection now will have the last code of end departure. Page 176, for crash B and crash C, these were just clarifications. We corrected traffic way field from one-way to two-way divided unprotected median. So this was just a clarification. Okay, page 199. So on page 199, this is where we have changed on page 199 the collision involving from motor vehicle and transport to parked motor vehicle, because we have taken the in readiness for motion out. Okay, so if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about motor vehicle and transport. This example, we have a vehicle in a driveway access area, waiting their turn to pull out onto the roadway. They are not on a roadway. They're not in a designated parking area, so they're considered a parked motor vehicle. So let's start the fun part. So now we are going to apply the new stuff that we've learned. So Captain came up with scenarios, and when we went out on the road, these went over extremely well. A lot of the comments afterwards. So we're going to start with the bicyclist. There's a couple things I want to denote on this picture to keep in mind. We're going to have a vehicle that hits this gentleman riding down the road. If you notice, the bicycle paintings are in the lane of the motoring public. He has a helmet. That backpack is not reflective, but he has reflective gear on his bike. Okay, so there are reflectors on the bike. Okay, keep in mind, he does not have his own lane. He is sharing the road with the motoring public. Okay, so let's look at this. Is this on or off roadway? On roadway. Collision involving. Pedicycle. Yes, so the collision involving pedicycle. Let's move further down to the non-motorist section. What type of non-motorist is this? Pedicyclist. Was it motorized? No. Okay, so that's what that's going to look like. Okay, let's look at safety devices. Page 110 of your preparation manual has your safety devices. Okay, remember I said he does not have reflective clothing, even though there was an orange backpack. I said he did have a helmet and reflectors. 13 and 20. 13 and 20. Perfect. Location. Where is the location? If someone were to strike this bicyclist, where is the location? On roadway. Outside crosswalk intersection. Okay, bicycle lane facility. Look on page 114 and 115. What kind of bicycle lane is this person in? And we're going to need the code. Okay, I heard 2. So this is a shared lane marking. Yes, they are sharing the lane with the motoring public. Okay? Well done, well done. So this is what that PDF is going to look like. Their actions are going to be walking, running, cycling, riding in traffic way with traffic. Okay, so we actually have some of these in our area. Okay, so we have the Amish Mennonite communities. This could be a trail riding group. Okay, this could be somebody just riding their horse. On or off roadway? On roadway. Collision involving. Yes, other non-motorist, okay, because then we're going to break down that other non-motorist, okay? What type of non-motorist is this? Occupant of an animal or an animal-drawn device?
Yes.
Yes. So now we have taken what once was just a pedestrian that really wasn't a pedestrian, and we have narrowed it down in 2 clicks, okay? Safety devices. I do want to go back. That buggy did have a reflector, and it did have lighting. So 19 and 20. Perfect. Location. Rural areas are pretty much always going to be on roadway outside crosswalk. Okay? No crosswalk in sight. Was this motorist crossing a road? No. Their actions are going to be?
Walking, running, cycling, riding in traffic way.
Yes, with traffic. So walking, running, cycling, riding in traffic way with traffic. Beautiful. Okay, that's what the crash report is going to look like. Okay, here we go. Pedestrian. These pedestrians did not run out of gas. They did not have a flat tire. They did not break down. They're going downtown shopping. Okay, so remember that. They are in a crosswalk, and if you look, they have a signal to walk. Okay, so remember that. This is going to be your true blue pedestrian. Crash type. On roadway. Crash, collision involving. Pedestrian. True blue pedestrian. Okay, let's look at this pedestrian a little closer. Were they a prior motor vehicle occupant?
No.
No, they were expected to go downtown and shop. Location.
On roadway within crosswalk.
Perfect. On roadway within crosswalk intersection. Let's break that down a little further. Crossing road
With signal.
at intersection marked crosswalk. They did everything right. Okay? Perfect. Now, let's flip the script a little bit. This is not doing everything perfect. At first, we thought maybe this gentleman was wearing a helmet. He's got headphones on, so he's not even listening to the sound around him. He has no reflectors. He has no safety equipment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish lanes, and he's on a bird scooter. Okay? On or off?
On.
Collision involving. This one gets some people. Pedestrian. So if he is a pedestrian on a personal conveyance, page 112 through 114, what kind of personal conveyance is he on? He is on two scooter stand-up motorized. Okay, we are seeing a lot of these. I'm going to give you an example. My daughter was having her senior pictures taken. We were downtown on Madison Street. Madison connects 54 to 50. There was a bird scooter holding up 15 cars of traffic that drove past us as we were taking pictures by Bush's Florist. On Madison. Okay? These crashes are getting out of control. The larger cities, we're seeing a huge increase in impaired driving on the bird scooters, but they're pedestrians. So we're kind of playing catch up. Okay, so that's what that part of the crash report is going to look like. The pedestrian on personal conveyance with the code of 2. Okay, so what kind of safety devices, if any, would apply here? None. Okay. Location.
Are we on the scooter still?
We are still on the scooter, yes. We are on the 6-lane traffic scooter, gentlemen.
Outside crosswalk.
On roadway outside crosswalk intersection. Was he crossing? No. What were his actions? Officially, walking, running, cycling, riding in traffic way.
We say he's going to be riding under traffic shortly.
Yes. There is a hearse in his future. Okay, so I've mentioned this before. I am mowing my own grass. I'm on my private property. I am not pulling out. I am mowing my grass, and someone comes off the road and hits me. Okay? Crash type. Off roadway. Very good. A collision involving. It's that new piece, other non-motorist. Okay, what kind of other non-motorist? The other non-motorist. Were they an occupant of an animal or animal-drawn device?
No.
No. So the exact same scenario as the Mennonite, except the Mennonite was on an animal-drawn device, and this is someone mowing their grass. So there is a report difference. It's a very easy way for us to be able to report those. Okay. Here we have no pictures, but we have a scenario. So we have a 2023 Hyundai Santa Fe Limited. The driver tells you he had the cruise set at 70. Normally, it keeps me a certain distance from the vehicle in front of me, but this time it just rammed right into them. Okay, so we're going to go to like 84, 85 in our manual. Automation systems, automation system in vehicle. It's in it. Okay, what level was on at the time? So if you go to level, now this is the code. So this can get a little confusing, and it won't be that for the vendors, for law enforcement, but for our purposes, do not look at number 1, number 2, number 3. Look at the number in parentheses next to the either no automation, driver assistance, partial automation. So what are we looking at? 2. Sure about that? Yeah, level 2. They only had one on. Did the driver cede control? Who was in control? The driver was still in control, so they did not cede control. Driver ceded control? No.
Remember, seat control is for your high automation and above.
Okay, so we are going to use our imagination a little bit for this one. Even though this is an emergency operations for floodwaters, we are going to pretend that these two vehicles down here at the bottom, the red vehicle and the Dodge, were in a crash. I want you to pay close attention. There is a MoDOT vehicle here. There is a MoDOT vehicle here. These are 2 lanes at the top, and then we filter down into 1. There's also no police officer here. Okay, so we're going to look at the work zone piece. Work zone piece only. Is this a work zone?
Yes.
Workers present.
Yes.
Even though you don't physically see them on the ground, they are in the vehicles. Yes, perfect. Type of work zone.
Lane shift crossover.
Lane closure. So we've closed one lane, merged into another. A lane shift.
If you look at the top, you see it's kind of side-by-side cars. There's 2 lanes of traffic going down to 1.
Yeah. If it were a lane shift, both lanes would shift together into, you know, kind of curve out of. You see a lot of those in your bridge constructions, okay, where you're shifting over kind of into oncoming traffic. So this is a lane closure. Location of the crash.
Activity area.
Activity area. You're in the heart of that work zone. Okay? In the heart of it. Law enforcement present?
No.
No. Okay, so about midway through being on the road, Captain throws this one in. This is from a dash cam of Troop C?
True base.
Troop H. Okay?
Yeah.
So we have a gentleman who's having a little bit of an issue. It's difficult to see, but there is a tire right here on his right side. Let's work through this one. Okay?
The scenario is somebody just strikes his back. They don't strike the tire first, they strike him, okay?
Okay? On or off roadway?
On.
On. Collision involving.
Pedestrian.
Okay? Beautiful. What kind of pedestrian?
Pedestrian, prior motor vehicle.
Prior motor vehicle. This is that piece that we are so desperate to get. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so actions. We can have up to 3 actions. 2 will apply here. Which 2 do you think will apply to this gentleman?
Pushing, working on vehicle.
Pushing, working on vehicle. Sitting in traffic way. So with that one, it'd be standing, lying, sitting in traffic way. Okay, so he is sitting, working on a vehicle. Unfortunately, on the roadway, but that is what he is doing. Okay, and he is also in the roadway improperly. Okay, he really shouldn't be there. Okay, so for all of our law enforcement people who are watching this presentation, to get to this PowerPoint, okay, you are going to go to the Highway Patrol website. You are going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. You will look for publications, handbooks, and manuals. Once you do that, you will also, again, scroll to the bottom, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see these documents. The first one is the web service documentation. That is what your vendor has for programming. The PowerPoint is next. Okay, the PowerPoint that you just saw will be loaded. The preparation manual, the one that you want to print, the reference preparation manual that we use this entire time is the 2024. Okay, so in the future, trying to get my clicker to work, I apologize. It's not wanting to. Here we go. Contacts. When Your vendor goes live January 1 of 2024. If you have questions, I am the Assistant Director, Mandy Cleathermos. Maria and Terry are our non-patrol supervisors. Here is their contact information and our mailing address. And do we have any questions?